Well, it's good to be back in California, and I was asked to take 5 to 7 minutes to give my opening remarks, and then get into a moderation session. I think U.S.-India relationship, one is will not get impacted by the current results of the election. I just want to make that very, very clear. Uh, you can basically define the relationship in four broad categories. One is geopolitical, second is economic, and third one is technology, and the fourth one is people to people. Now, on the geopolitics side, you have to understand that the relation between India and the US is very much defined on the posture and aggression of China. When you look at the history between India and China, it has not been a very positive relationship. There was a war in '62, and a few years ago, there was another fist fight where almost 36 Indian soldiers died, roughly 20 plus Chinese died, and Chinese moved roughly 100,000 troops on the border, which is a disputed border. India moved almost 100,000 troops on that border, and they're live day in, day out, and that sense of pressure continues between the two countries. But you have to understand that China has taken a very, very aggressive posture towards India, basically in every aspect, from trade down to technology. And what more important is it has decided, it was always decided that it will not treat India as an equal partner. And so, from the UN Security Council to the nuclear missile arena, there's always a obstacle set up by China towards pushing India's inclusion. And for US, what we see is the stress point between China and US will continue to grow wider as US put more pressure on the technology transfer, on other aspect of the relationship. And as the stress point goes up, US India come much, much closer in every aspect. So, and I can talk more about later in geopolitics side. On the economic side, what we are seeing is the trade between the two countries is roughly around $200 billion. And but what we are also seeing is that the U.S. companies are trying to de-risk their supply chain from China. And one of the potential countries, beside Vietnam, Cambodia, India is playing a pivotal role. For example, 3 years ago, Apple produced zero smartphones or any technology in India. This year, 2000, I mean, iPhone 16, 25% of the production will be made in India itself. We're talking to almost 200 companies trying to move a lot of their manufacturing into India itself. So India plays a pivotal role from a supply chain perspective. But more important is as India's economy grows up to $4 trillion, by 27, $5 trillion, and the objective is to take it to 30 plus $1 trillion by 2047. India market becomes lucrative for all the US companies. Again, 3 years ago, Apple had almost less than 1% of the market share of Indian smartphones. This year, it has crossed 7% itself. It's the fastest growing market for Apple phones. It is still smaller as compared to China, where Apple's revenue in China is roughly around $80 billion. So I think but that market will keep on picking up from India perspective. So geopolitics is driving supply chain, de-risking, and also market opportunity. Now on the technology side, when Prime Minister came in, India, US signed a massive agreement, almost 103 agreements when the Prime Minister was here for the state visit. And one of the platform we talk about is emerging technology itself. I said that's the platform where we are working on trying to see G engine transfer, quantum, AI, cyber, you can name it. There are roughly 103 different variation of technology we're working with the US government and also with the Indian government itself. Now, people to people, 5 million Indian Americans today, 1.2 million holding green cards will become someday permanent citizens of the country. They have roughly twice the average per capita income, the most highest educated minority group in the country, engages very much in the political arena. If you look at the Biden administration, roughly 150 Indian Americans have been positioned in different parts, from Neera Tandon in the White House down to Undersecretary and other aspect of the leadership there. So we expect the Indian Americans to play a pivotal role driving this relationship as we move forward. So that's my opening remarks as far as the relationship goes, and I believe this relationship will continue to grow. We will have some issues. For example, in the case of Panun assassination attempt, but both sides basically managed that with maturity. They parked that issue in a sandbox. They will deal with it. We have a bigger issue to deal with it. As what Canada did, basically went out openly rebuked India, and that just collapsed from that perspective. So I think the relationship is getting wider, deeper, mature, and interests are basically are managed quite maturely between the two entities itself. So Asha, to you.
So, so first of all, everything that I wanted to say, Mukesh has just said. I'm now scrambling to figure out what I should. But here's what I think. What we saw in the last 2 months, we saw a miracle of the exercise of democracy that the planet has never seen, and what we have come away with is the Indians doing things in a way in which everybody is happy. I was just reading and I was just watching. I'm watching, even the sort of the Western media, U.S. India media. I was looking at what's going on. What are the reports? What are the reactions of the people? Literally, from the opposition parties to small regional parties to women's groups to the prime minister's group, everybody is happy and satisfied and feels like they have a voice. So kudos to the Indian electorate for having pulled off something that nobody was expecting. Most people were expecting sort of a landslide by the BJP, which did not happen. And I think it's a good thing. It's very good that we have the opposition feeling strong and wanting to exercise their right to make demands. Now that said, we have two members of the coalition, right, of the new coalition government. That's not only going to include, of course, the BJP is there, but there's also Nitish Kumar and Chandrababu Naidu. For me, I'm deeply familiar with what Chandrababu Naidu brings to the table. What Naidu brings to the table from the state of Andhra is an unprecedented friendliness towards business and towards technology. This is a great thing because this is going to be synergistic with what the prime minister wants, right? They want a straight out capitalistic, US friendly development which can help usher India into a $35 trillion economy. If we really want to shoot for that number, we will have to be wedded to the idea of a market driven growth with less intervention by the old bureaucracy or even by the regulatory system. So that's it. So that's great. Chandrababu, I see, is very synergistic to that vision, which is great news. I don't know much about Nitish. So, when I come back to you, Mukesh, I'm going to ask you more about Nitish Kumar. What do you think? Do you think this could derail some of the progress we've made on the US India partnerships, right? On various business partnerships, which you guys are involved with. And Arzan, you guys are involved with all things defense. So, before I hand over I want Arzan to talk a little bit about what he's working on. But before I hand over to that, I actually do feel that India, US have moved away from the China plus one rhetoric. Initially, there used to be this idea that there is, India is part of the China plus one dynamic. Not anymore. In the last 3 years, something has changed fundamentally. And what the US is recognizing is that it's partnering with India not just for the economic more transactional dynamic and a matrix that was there with China. This relationship is coming about because of consistently similar value systems of democracy, freedom, individual rights, equality of women, openness of society, and rule of law. So those values and the people-to-people connection. We don't have this many people-to-people. We don't have Indians in China. So this China plus one thing that we are talking about is thing of the past. It's now US India on its own trajectory in its own DNA. So, but that said, the fact that the US and India are seeing China as a geopolitical threat, even as a military threat because of what we have seen in the last 2 or 3 years, that dynamic is likely to stay the same. So, Arzan, I want you to tell us a little bit about what is your work on this, and do you see any changes happening in this new, given that there's a new coalition government coming up? What do you think of this?
Thank you, Asha, and thank you to the Asia Society and to USISPF. First of all, before I even get into that, I am very gratified to see people come and talk and think and listen about the topic of India, right? Because this is something sort of at a meta level, pardon the pun, I think this is a topic that is understudied and underappreciated. And so it's deeply gratifying to me to see people from a variety of sectors, from a variety of different interests coming in and talking about this and caring about this. So thank you to everyone involved in organising this. I study Indian foreign and defence policy, right? And I study India's relationship with the US, especially from that sort of strategic side. And I think if I was to characterise it overall, I think your opening remarks are both correct, which is to say that China is an inescapable part of this relationship. You cannot ignore it, but it's not all there is, right? What political scientists would say, it is necessary but not sufficient to describe what is happening in US-India relations. So, for example, I would say that on a sector-by-sector basis, especially when you look at defense issues, China is obviously the framing context for a lot of what India and the US do together. When I do my research or my writing, I have to basically tip my hat to China in the first paragraph of everything I say, because it is the starting point of US-India defense relations. But what I think Mukesh and Asha have hit on is that the relationship, the US-India relationship is becoming bigger than that. And ISET is a big part of that because it is an issue that cuts across so many sectors and so many dimensions of this relationship. So when Mukesh said, look, there are 4 dimensions to this relationship, right? Geopolitics, economics, tech, and people to people. That's correct. But I would add a caveat that all of those bleed into each other as well. They're all inseparable from each other as well. And specifically, I think the big headline news that we have seen in the past year or two with the advent of ISET and the continued momentum behind ISET is that this is going to be one of the central connective tissues of the relationship because it touches on so many other aspects of the relationship. From people to people.
But what does ISET stand for? What is it?
Of course, yeah. So ISET is the Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technology. It's a policy initiative that the two governments, the Indian and US governments, began and unveiled at the start of last year, so about 18 months ago. Critically, it is run out of the chief executives of each government. So it's run out of the Prime Minister's office in India, and it's run out of the White House in the US. Which means what? When you are trying to move the machinery of state, when the apex of the state is committed to something and gives what we would call a demand signal to say, work on this as a priority, the rest of the state will work on this, all right? And so the idea of ISET is to create a policy framework that will allow the tech and innovation ecosystems of each country to cooperate much more closely together, to figure out ways to get around things like export controls, which have previously held the relationship back and been obstacles to it. And so there is a push to break down the barriers that have held the relationship back thus far. And so ISET is a really promising example of the two countries saying, this is a priority, but critically, for ISET to succeed, it requires not only government action, but the government to enable the private sectors of the two countries to work more closely together. And so again, it's I said is necessary but not sufficient. It creates the enabling conditions for greater cooperation, but for that to come to fruition, it needs to be executed by people here in the Valley and all around the two countries. So I think ISET is one of the sort of, has the potential, I should say, to become one of the real cross-cutting central nodes in the relationship, which is why it's so important. It touches on everything that Mukesh talked about, from defense issues to economic issues to people issues. And so that is a critical innovation in the past couple of years. But I think also even beyond that, to your point, Asha, it's not just a bilateral relationship anymore. Both countries recognize that the international system is under strain, in part from China, but not exclusively from China, because I think there's a recognition that there are just some issues that are new, that the existing international architecture is not fit to manage. Everything from the pandemic to these critical and emerging technologies, to new supply chains, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's an effort by these two countries to actually build order in the international system, to buttress the international system, because it is not fit for purpose, right? External Affairs Minister Jaishankar has said explicitly that the existing institutional architecture is not fit for purpose, which is why we have to build up new groupings like the Quad to help buttress the institutions of international order.
So I want to ask you on that front before I go to Mukesh. Arzan, you've been actually in the trenches in India. You've been at the border of Ladakh, between the border between India and China. You are understanding the whole defense ecosystem much more deeply than what we are used to. Do you think that the private sector is involved enough? Is it synergistic enough with this US-India initiative that's there on defense and security in the Indo-Pacific? Is the private sector actively there so that it understands what are the problems that need to be solved, right? So, for example, let's say whether it's a drone technologies, whether it's autonomous warfare, whether it's robotics, do we have enough of a back and forth between the private sector and the governments on both sides, so that the startup ecosystem understands and is synergized with this imperative, and actually can spin off technologies just like Israel did. Israel has been part of that whole idea of sort of saying, we are in a region that needs help on so and so front.
Right.
Let's invest our resources into various universities and things like DARPA in Israel, which has then come up with technologies which are problem solving. Do we have that kind of a synergy in this US-India relationship?
Not yet. What I do see is a hunger, and I'm not deeply involved in the startup ecosystem in either country, but from what I have observed, there is a hunger for greater cooperation between the two countries. But also what interests me especially is that there is a hunger for, among certain portions or sectors of the startup ecosystem in both countries, to care about national security issues. And this to me is relatively new, right? In both countries. This is not an Indian issue, right? In both countries, there is a growing, still incipient, but growing recognition that national security matters and that the startup ecosystem has a role to play in national security. I think in both countries, the governments are wrestling with figuring out the correct policy settings. How do we get out of the way to enable the startups to do what they need to do and to also build those transnational networks, the interstate networks? And again, as I said before, I think a lot of the problem is that the existing policy settings are designed to keep secrets.
Right.
And it's not designed to facilitate exchange of information and ideas and innovation. And so there has to be there is a mind shift that is occurring to change those policy settings in the States. The big missing pieces of the puzzle, I think, so far are, one, the idea that the startups on each side of the relationship know what is possible and what is needed. It's just a matter of creating an awareness of what they can do. And the second element that is missing, I think, is a coordinating function to understand what should be the priorities. And this is almost antithetical to the startup culture, right? The startup culture is do what you can, do it quickly, disrupt, right? There is a culture clash there with strategic issues, because on a strategic side, there is, I would argue, a need to make hard decisions about trade-offs and to prioritize what is important, achievable, affordable, and that will meet the military need quickly enough and affordably enough.
Right.
And so you can't just mess around. You need direction.
Right. No, absolutely. So on that, so building on that very important point that you just made, Arzan, Mukesh, I want to ask you, you guys are in the critical flow of this US-India strategic and business partnership that's going on right now. Do you see a role for people who are in, let's say, in venture capital, right, who are at the forefront of technology, kind of people like Tesla? Look at Tesla and its role in Ukraine. It is playing a role in the war in helping Ukrainian forces have access to certain technology, to certain data that can help the Ukrainian forces defend themselves against Russian aggression. Do you think we have something in place, or is there room for growing, some kind of a sort of an activity by venture capitalists and by the business sector to come into this mix and say, here are the opportunities that can help build these next trillion-dollar companies that will understand what's going on geopolitically and leverage that from a business perspective? Are you seeing that kind of a business-friendly, space that might be available and where we can all participate more actively?
The answer is yes, Asha. I think you have to look at, just to follow up on the last question on startups in defense, we are seeing tens of Indian companies now getting engaged with the US Department of Defense, providing solutions which are cost effective, efficient, and very productive. And once India opened up its space for private sector, almost 260 companies from India are out there, from rocket launches to platform managing debris in the space itself. What's interesting to you is that, if I give you an example of the generic drug market, 20 years ago, Indian companies came into the US generic drug market and brought the cost of drugs way, way down itself. Today, Indian companies have around 30% of the market, and they save billions of dollars to US government. I see the same scenario going forward 20 years from now in the defense space, where Indian startups are coming in, providing cost-effective solution to the defense department itself. Where we are seeing challenges is the large companies, either they are buying them out or they're trying to stop them coming in itself. And that's where we have to play a very pivotal role. Now, the role of VC is critical, because if you look at majority of the funding so far in Indian startups has come from the US.
Yeah.
We're seeing Middle Eastern, but that's more of an institutional and sovereign funds coming in. It's the US companies who are taking the risk from a VC perspective, from in every aspect, putting in money and trying to drive the whole ecosystem itself. So the answer is yes, VCs have a very strong role to play. Answer is yes, the startups will play a very pivotal role on the defense technology, space technology itself. So I think we are seeing, and we brought quite a few companies from India, which are doing $5-10 million, and now they're getting valuation after 5 years in billions of dollars itself. So they are being very, very successful. So I think we see this momentum picking up, moving forward, and it's going to be a win-win solution for both countries.
So let me ask you, Mukesh, I want to pivot a little bit away from this. So the opportunities are there. We are all going to be, I'm sure, working towards creating a space for venture capitalists and startups. But I want to come back to the point about this new coalition government. Tell us, I'm bullish on Chandrababu Naidu. I know that if he's in the mix, right? If he's in this new coalition government, I mean, it cannot be anything less than sort of 1 + 1 = 11, because he's fabulous, he's entrepreneurial, he's the chief minister with a vision. So there I'm bullish. But do you think that Nitish Kumar, who is another critical element of this new coalition government, do you think, Mukesh, could that destabilize the Indian government? And the reason I'm asking you this question is because I feel that if the stability of the Indian government is hobbled in any way because of one or two sort of loose screws in this whole matrix, I think that could give a lot of jitteriness, a lot of anxiety to foreign investors and to all investors who are in this US India corridor. So what do you think? I mean, do you think that this is a strong bulletproof coalition? What do you think of? And please tell us a little bit about Nitish Kumar. I don't know much about him.
Well, you have to understand, Nitish Kumar has been Chief Minister of Bihar for many, many years. And, we've worked with him. And you have to understand, Nitish has no allegiance to anybody except to himself. And
So he's like Trump.
so when you look at the current NDA, is roughly around 293, 94, and Nitish has around 14, 15, 12. So if you take Nitish out of the equation, they still have a majority. You have to understand very clearly, if Nitish saw that he could go form a government with the Congress or India bloc itself, then he would have demanded, hey, make me deputy prime minister. But he saw that he could not do anything there.
Right.
And that's why he stayed on with NDA. So I think you have to understand the play we see happening is Nitish, as time goes by, today he does not matter so much because he's already asking 5 cabinet positions for his 12 MPs itself. And if you take him out also, the government still has majority. As time goes by, this government or this coalition will go after the independent and then bring them into the fold itself. So I don't think we should be worried about the stability of the government.
Okay.
We should not be worried about the stability of the policy. They will continue because you have to understand this government realizes that it has to create more economic opportunity than focus on the Hindu messaging itself. So they will pivot back to economic agenda, and they have to create roughly 1 million jobs a month. And those jobs will come only when you have FDI coming at almost $100 billion a year.
Right.
And FDI is only going to come in when you have ease of doing business in India, more economic reforms. So I don't think Nitish Kumar has any impact if he wants to stay in or go out. This government stays on.
So let me ask you about this jobs, dilemma that we are hearing a lot about the fact that India needs to create more jobs. Mukesh, I don't see anybody in India who is not working. Everybody is working, and there is. I mean, I don't have the numbers. Maybe Shrikar has these numbers, but Shrikar, what is the percentage of the Indian economy which is informal, right? Those who are still earning by whether it's domestic work, whether it is running rickshaws, whether it is helping people at the railway station. There people are earning income through this, and of course they are not in the formal census, so we don't see them in the data. The way we capture Indian economy, which is 80% of the economy or something, the way we capture the informal economy is through surveys, Mukesh. Do you think this is? I mean, how do we bring in this conversation about the fact that there is still work going on in the Indian economy, and it may not be a formal job, but it's work. So why is it that we are not considering this as work?
Well, you have to look at multiple ways this challenge. You have a young population, which is basically growing, and you have a population which is not skilled to meet the demand of 21st century jobs itself. When you look at 3.2 million engineers who graduate, I would say 90% are not ready to work in the corporate environment itself. You have to skill them to be able to make productive itself. And so you have an issue of skilling, and you have a skill of opportunity. You have to understand almost 60% of the workforce is still on the agriculture side, but they're only 12% of the GDP.
Right.
And that 65% is moving to the villages. I mean, say,
Right, yeah,
next 10 years, you will see almost 400 million Indians will migrate from villages to the city itself. The largest migration in the history of humankind itself. So I think that's a big, big challenge, and government realizes that. So they have to go create jobs, and those jobs are only going to come in if you have a large number of FDI coming in, and that FDI is only going to come in if the government is stable and basically having a reform agenda itself.
How many minutes do we have before we open up to the we have 9 more minutes? Okay. So Arzan, in your view, you've been doing some research here at Stanford on this whole, the US-India partnership on defense and on geopolitics and things like that. In your view, how strong is the Quad? Is it, and what kind of economic activities is it likely to spin off if it gets more, serious? And do you see bodies like RCEP still kind of coming? Because I know that, I don't know if I know India walked away from RCEP, but do you see anything else like that cooking up in the horizon?
So on the Quad itself, I'm glad you said the Quad, right? It's one of my bugbears when people refer to the Quad as the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, because it's not. That's not its name. Since it was resuscitated in 2017, it is known as just the Quad. And it's been a very deliberate branding exercise to call it just the Quad, not the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue. And that's a deliberate choice. And the reason is because, continuing on from what I was saying earlier, I think that I see the Quad as an effort by the 4 members, the US, India, Australia, and Japan, to essentially fill in the gaps and to buttress the international system in the Indo-Pacific where it was found wanting. Now, that includes everything from providing alternative regulatory frameworks for critical and emerging technologies, to dealing with climate change, to helping with educational exchange, et cetera, maritime security even. But the security aspect of the Quad is actually peripheral. It's actually outside the formal bounds of the Quad, right? The Quad as a entity, as a grouping of the 4 countries, does not deal with defense issues. The 4 countries do cooperate on defense, but not under the auspices of the Quad. So what the Quad does is try to do all these other things aside from defense issues. And one of them, speaking of business and economics, is a new initiative called the Quad Investors Network. Now, this is a recognition by the 4 Quad countries that they are not China. And they do not have at their fingertips the ability to direct outgoing investments, right? They can't direct it. So all they can do is encourage it, urge it, and create the policy framework to enable it and encourage it. And so that's what the Quad Investor Network is an attempt to do, to bring investment and capital and direct it or urge it to be directed towards issues and sectors and countries where it may make a difference in regional politics. So I think that's the sort of dilemma that the Quad faces, right? The countries of the Quad pride themselves on being market economies. So they are not the same as China. They don't have the same strengths as China, but maybe they've got other strengths. They can foster investment.
Test. Oh.
Test.
They can foster investment. I don't think I need this.
Thank you.
They can foster investment and. Could you not hear me before? Should I repeat everything?
Can you start from the beginning?
Just in time. So I think the key bottom line here is that we are not China, and we should not try to compete symmetrically with China. Countries like the US and India and their partners in the Quad have different strengths to bring to bear, and I think there is a recognition that members of the Quad need to play on those strengths, and that includes things like summoning the collective power of our private industry, our regulatory frameworks, rather than trying to do the same thing that China's doing.
Okay, and then with thank you for that, Arzan. What I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap up this our panel discussion so I can open this up to the audience. But one quick last question for Mukesh, as there is a lot of excitement globally and internationally in Europe, in US and in Africa about the rise of India, because the rise of India is actually very synergistic. It's very inclusive. What we are seeing is a big effort by the Indian government to try and export its digital public infrastructure to Africa. And we are also seeing that in Latin America, Mukesh. I'm seeing Indian, the people from the bureaucracy, Indian entrepreneurs. Every day I'm seeing these lectures happening in New York, Washington, DC, South Africa, you name it, in Kenya, about how the digital public infrastructure can be modularized and either sold or gifted to certain countries, just so as to be able to bring up people who are not in the economic system into the digital world. So what do you think? What are the prospects of DPI really being instrumental in accelerating this inclusion of people from the bottom sector of the pyramid into the global economy? There's no doubt that it's happening, but do you think the DPI will increase that momentum, Mukesh? What do you think?
Well, you have to look at the DNA of what India is trying to do. When you look at China is seen as a hard power and India is seen as a soft power. The rise of China is seen threatening the global order, whereas India's rise is seen as encompassing and supporting the global order. If you look at during the COVID time, China exported vaccines, and countries like Hungary paid $100 per shot itself. And India exported 210 million shots of vaccine and gave it free away to the rest of the world itself. And so basically, what we saw is India playing a role where everything is not commercial, everything is not about just making money. It's more about playing a citizen of a global world and trying to help where it can. So we see the same scenario happening in the digital stack, where it is going out, providing this help, and not only just to the emerging market. Now they're just done with France also. Or you look at Singapore, where you can basically use the UPI stack and charge in rupees and gets paid there. Maldives, where they had some friction a year ago, they're given that. So I think what we are seeing is the solutions coming out from India, which are much more cost-effective, scalable, affordable, is a mantra which we see moving around. So I think, will it help? Yes, I think it's going to help. How much it's going to help? Time will tell that.
Okay, so that said, I think the panel has given a fantastic snapshot of what's going on between our two nations, but also what's happening globally. The fast-paced installation of the digital public infrastructure, where there are people where it's not been there in the past, and I think these are exciting times. These are unprecedented times when all of us who could be sort of playing a role in this, especially coming from Silicon Valley, we could be playing a role in this momentum and seeing how this new relationship, and Indian-US relationship is actually new, because we have been partnered. Russia had picked India as its partner, and America had picked the Pakistan-Afghan, for its partnership. So in real terms, this is a new relationship, and so these are exciting times, and I hope you will take this as a conversation as a starting point. So let's move to the Q&A from the audience. Yes.
She was ahead of you. Okay.
have one question each for Arzan and for Mukesh. Arzan, you said that the global order, the international order, is precariously balanced, and one of the fulcrums is clearly the US-China relationship. That fulcrum is going to change dramatically exactly 5 months from today, on Wednesday, the 6th of November. If Trump comes back, and I'm talking about the general understanding in India and in the US, he'll probably cut a deal with the Chinese. There's no doubt about that. It's transaction stuff. If Biden comes back, he is going to break out of the cul-de-sac that is politically hampered with today. That relationship also, it's just too strong and too long. So how do you see, what scenario do you see as far as India is concerned? That's your question. Mukesh, clearly if you look, it's very clear, whatever else the election might have done, that economic policy, among other things, will have a reset. And I'm talking about just the election results. If you see where, if UP had delivered to the BJP what it did in the past, they would have crossed the majority. It's not just UP, but also where in UP they've lost and what has happened. In some senses, Nitish Kumar can help them much more in this. Given the reset that is going to occur, what reset do you see and what implications do they have for US-India relations? I have theories on it, but I leave it to you.
Go ahead.
I think I have less confidence than you might about what would happen if Trump were re-elected. To my mind, the biggest undercurrent or overarching theme of a Trump presidency is unpredictability. It's not that he's going to do this or that. We don't know. He doesn't know. Right? It's that it could be anything. Right? When he was first elected and inaugurated, he made calls, phone calls to I think the president of Taiwan or something, that was completely outside of anyone's conception of what is plausible. And so to my mind, the issue with Trump is not that he's going to cut a deal, because I think it's plausible that he would go completely the opposite way and be completely more belligerent than what we've seen so far from the US. So,
as a bargaining chip.
Possibly, but who knows, right? So from my mind, the key issue with Trump is unpredictability. Now, the final point I would make on that is, this is one of the key risks in the US-India relationship. And that is the idea of stability, right? We began today by saying, and I think Mukesh said this, that the Indian election will bring continuity in Indian policy and therefore in the India-US relationship. And I think a Biden re-election would do that as well, would bring continuity. The issue with Trump is it brings unpredictability. And so to safeguard against that, to insulate against that unpredictability, the challenge for the state, for the bureaucracy on both sides, for the wider system on both sides, and that includes people gathered here. The challenge is to institutionalize, regularize, to bed down and consolidate the gains that we have been making in the relationship, lest they be whimsically cast aside by a new president, right? And so that's the collective job for everyone, to make sure that the gains we have made in this relationship are not squandered, that they can be continued, and the trajectory can continue.
Anupam, will there be a reset, and how does it impact the US-India relationship? I think the reset is going to be focused more on job creation. I think the message has gone loud and clear. Yes, you build a Ram Mandir, that's fine, but that doesn't feed us. And so you will see an aggressive agenda. And I think that's where US private sector will play a critical role by investing, both in infrastructure, both in private sector itself, because so far infrastructure is the biggest job creator beside the farm land in India. So I think that reset will go on the economic terms. Now, coming to the US-India relationship, regardless of who it is, either Biden or Trump, I think the relationship will continue to move forward because these are geopolitical interests between the two countries. Yes, India, you have to understand, is taking into its calculation that tomorrow, if Trump makes a deal with China, will it leave India hanging? And that's the reason, if you look at India, continue to maintain its relationship with Russia, continue to have a relationship with Iran, continue to have an open dialogue with China. So I think you have to understand, because there's a DNA issue which USA has to deal with. Since after the Second World War, every partnership, the other partner was subservient. Look at Germany, France, UK, anybody else. India is the first country which is saying we are equal. And I think that's where the conversation is, that's where the challenges US is facing with India, because if India buys Russian oil, there were some heartburns here. But after some time, they realize it's good for them that India is buying Russian oil, because then rest of the oil from Saudis, everything the Europeans can buy also. So I think India will continue to play a very assertive and up to a certain extent independent role as a nation itself. So regardless if you make a deal with China or not, the India relationship with the US will continue between the benefit of two countries itself.
There was another question somewhere. Yeah. Okay, Rahul. Yeah. I think this. Sure.
Hello. Thank you for the excellent panel. Anjali Jaiswal, I just wanted to bring in one other piece into this conversation and ask a question. You know, New Delhi broke 50 degrees Celsius last month, right? 122 degrees Fahrenheit. We have wildfires in Northern California.
Mm-hmm.
In order to hopefully achieve the development goals of India by 2047, India will need at least 2 to 3 times the energy capacity it currently has, installed energy. India imports 90% of its oil. India also imports 50% of its coal. So my question is, both in terms of all of, Mukeshji, the 4 areas that you outlined in terms of the governments, the people, the technology, where does climate change fit into all of this in terms of the priority and action that's needed? Because in my view, we cannot solve climate change without US-India cooperation.
Let me, Mukesh, I'll just take that. I'll just, add something and then I'll hand it to Mukesh because he probably knows this better. So I think the model that we have used, really in the US, right? The Biden administration has used this model of saying we will, through the Inflation Reduction Act and so on, we've said we will try and encourage Americans to consume more green energy. But that's more on this, demand side. I think that's a model that I don't see. It's not going. What it's doing is it's not going to spur, more of sort of innovation that we need on the green tech side. What we need really is something where we are actually incentivizing even the business sector to reduce the. So for me, this whole idea of encouraging just people to consume green energy is not the solution. But Mukesh might have better thoughts on this one.
You have to understand that the Paris Accord, everybody made a commitment to basically reduce the carbon footprints and go more and more renewable. And if you look at the only country which has kept on track is India so far. Whereas when it comes to the US, Obama made the commitment, Trump threw everything out of the window, and the Biden's come back and had made this commitment again. I think the biggest challenge India has is environment, and that includes climate. Because when you look at the quality of air today in Delhi, anything less than 400 is considered a good day in Delhi on the AQI. And what we are seeing, the impact of that is 25% of the newborn kids in New Delhi are born with bronchitis. And what we're seeing is people who live around Ring Road, which is like a main artery of Delhi, within 100 meters on both sides, the rise of cancer is 1% on an annual basis itself. So the environment is having a big impact. I think the challenge the country has is create jobs, fix the environment, work on the climate, and that's a complex challenge you have. There were commitments made during the Paris session that there'll be $100 billion committed on an annual basis. Nothing came. Nothing came itself. So what we are seeing is India is focusing more and more renewable, because I think it's not just about climate, it's about energy security. What really happened with Iran and Middle East itself, for every dollar barrel price goes up in the oil market, it has a $1 billion impact on India's foreign exchange itself. And that percolates down to price of tomatoes and onions itself. And governments have been thrown out because they were out of control. So I think India is working. Will it meet its objective of 2070? We don't know. But I think unless we pump in a lot of capital, that challenge remains quite formidable.
Okay, I think do we have 60 seconds more? Okay, 60 seconds, Rahul.
To what extent, so amongst many things, the Russian invasion of Ukraine showed that Russian weapons aren't today. The Russia-Ukraine war has shown, amongst many things, that Russian weapons aren't of the quality of American weapons, and that China's MIC has grown to a level that is more and more threatening to India compared to 20 years ago. But India has also shown great skills in MIC. So to what extent can a U.S.-India partnership in MIC be a part of this relationship?
Arzan.
So I think, as far as there are many lessons that can be learned from the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But for India, it's not just that the quality of the equipment is substandard; it's that the reliability of the supply chain is not reliable, right? And so there are equipment that have been ordered that will not be delivered to India from Russia because of this conflict, right? And so I think the larger lesson is that Russia may not be a reliable supplier going forward. There is an effort underway, and ISET is part of this, to lash up the defense industrial ecosystems of the two countries, both from the sort of cutting edge side to the big standard suppliers who provide things like tanks and airplanes. But there's a lot of difficulties in actually executing that. Everything from the tax regimen in India that impedes things like MRO, to literally budget shortfalls that impede recapitalization of the force, right? So there's a lot of big, difficult obstacles in doing that. But I do think that there are opportunities, and the private sector has to play a role in this, in coming up with new ways of defense industrial cooperation that are not the way that we've been doing it in previous decades. And I think the Ukraine war is a good example, as Asha was saying before, of innovative technologies being applied in innovative ways on the battlefield, and thereby innovative ways to procure them as well for the two countries.
Thank you.
So listen, this was absolutely phenomenal. Thank you so much, Mukesh and Arzan, and thank you to all of you for being here, and to Asia Society for putting together this fabulous event. So please, mingle with our speakers.